Hello and welcome back to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for being here. I have the most amazing guest with me today. I'm so excited to have him on the show. His name is Jayson Downing, and he is a former Marine Corps captain and combat veteran with multiple overseas deployments. He holds multiple graduate degrees with honors and has worked as a college professor and business consultant. He is also an author. His new book is titled Reawakening the Warrior Spirit, exploring what it means to be a warrior in the modern West, which engages some of the most challenging topics of the day from the unique perspective of the military warrior mindset. Jayson, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you. This is one of my favorite subjects, the warrior spirit, the spirit of a warrior, and what it does for not only ourselves as individuals, but how it impacts society in general. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and have you tell us your story, how you got into the military, all the way through your careers and what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. Again, thanks again for having me here. Really glad and happy to be on the show. I've been looking forward to this conversation now for a while as well. So very briefly, my story, I was in college up in Santa Barbara, California, back in 2006 to 2009. And I had always had a great appreciation for the military and for those who serve the country, for those who serve their communities. My uncle was a police officer. Both my grandparents fought in World War II. I had never really had it on my mind to join the military personally, but I did. There was definitely that like abiding appreciation just in our family. But when I was up in college, I ended up, at that time, the Iraq War was still a very big thing, and then as that kind of started to trail down, then Afghanistan started to pick back up again, and I remember it was hot topic of conversation at the time, and everybody was saying, whether it be my college professors or the other students around me were trying to, everybody had their opinion as to, what the soldiers want. And in my mind, I was like, you don't know what the soldiers want. You're not there. You're not talking to them. And I think at the same time that I had this desire to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, I didn't exactly know what that meant. I also had this deep desire in me to kind of to do my part and also to prove myself, to challenge myself, and to see what I was capable of. So when some Marine Corps recruiters came to campus and I started talking with them, they told me about the OCS program, Officer Candidate School. And so that would say, 10-week program over the summer where you got to go. It's basically boot camp out in Virginia. And it was like a boot camp version for officers where they see whether or not you have what it takes to be an officer. And I thought, this is perfect because, I get to figure out what this whole thing is about. And there was no commitment afterwards. And I went out there and really got my butt kicked, first of all, but also got to, work alongside a group of men and women who called themselves Marines and who lived differently, who held themselves to a very high standard, who were consummate leaders and consummate warriors, not just on the battlefield, but also in their personal lives. I think that's what drew me into it. And they lived what they preached. And that was just very attractive to me. And so I got hooked and I said, maybe this won't be a career for me, but this is something I want to do. And so that really started my journey. Once I graduated college, I then joined the Marines, went through about 2 more years of training after that. As I went through the basic school, I went through my MOS training, which is military occupation specialty training, and ended up doing 2 deployments, one to Afghanistan, the other to the Western Pacific. And we can talk more about those. I learned a lot while I was overseas, got to see a lot. And following 2 deployments, one was as an intelligence officer, the second was as a scout sniper platoon commander. And I was able to pretty much do everything that I wanted to do in the military. At the end of 5 years, I said, I've been able to be a platoon commander. I've been able to be overseas in a combat zone. I feel like the next mission of my life is maybe outside the military. So that's what prompted me to transfer. I went through more schooling, as you've already mentioned, and what I've realized since then is that part of my mission, part of my purpose is to communicate to others what was so freely given to me. And especially to the younger generation, those who are growing up in our modern Western culture, and they're asking themselves these difficult questions. What does it mean to be a warrior? What does it mean to take control of my life? And all of that information was given to me very freely by warriors, by mentors when I was in the service. And now I'm trying to communicate that to the next generation, those who aren't lucky enough to have somebody who's mentoring them on a daily basis.
Nice. I just absolutely love that, especially because I think that the younger generation, maybe I'm dating myself, but, they're a little bit coddled. They're a little bit sheltered. We were sheltered growing up. I'm a baby boomer, but the reality of life, and, we were going through some very dangerous times back then too, when I was a little girl growing up. But it seems like everybody's so concerned with their feelings that they don't even realize how much strength and power they really have deep inside of themselves, as well as the control to be able to experience it and apply it to their daily life.
Yeah. Well, and it's difficult, because if you come to me with a problem and you say, my feelings have been hurt, and I'm feeling down, and I'm feeling depressed, there's two different responses that I can give to that, right? One is that, I'm really sorry, it's not your fault. I can try to comfort, and then I could, also turn around and say, it doesn't really matter what you're feeling right now. You have the strength to overcome this. You need to get up, and you need to work through these obstacles that have been placed in your way, and you need to figure out how strong you are. Now, it's not always the right answer to give the second response, the kind of the harsher, the tough love response, right? That's not always the right response, but it can't never be the right response, right? You need to hear that sometimes. And in our modern culture, we've kind of made that a taboo response, where you're not allowed to, or it's definitely looked down upon. There's this focus on short-term empathy, where we prioritize that instead of somebody's long-term, what's better for them long-term. And it's really easy to fall into that, because you get kudos if you can say, well, I was very nice, I was empathetic, I told them what they wanted to hear, and that we give people a lot of congratulations right now for doing stuff like that. But if I say that I admire you or I like you, the question is, what version of you? The version of you that's right now, I'm trying to help you right now, or am I trying to help the version of you that exists in 10 years? Because there might be two different strategies that I take depending on which version of you I'm trying to help. And so anyway, I agree with you. It's difficult to see some of the trends that have beset our current culture. I say in the book, we used to praise stories of strength and heroism. Now we focus more on stories of victimhood and oppression. We used to, congratulate people who were risk takers and who built things. Now we seem to focus and listen to the complainers. Instead of asking what we can give, we ask what we can take, or worse, what we're owed. And these are some of the concerning things. What's going on. I trace it back to, as we discussed kind of at the beginning, the decline of the warrior spirit in the modern West, and what's going on there.
And we talked about this even before we started recording, about the warrior spirit and what the definition of the warrior spirit is. And as I told you, a lot of people I talk to, when they see my one book about the warrior, it's like, oh my gosh, no, why can't we just have peace? Warrior bad, it's about aggression, warfare, conflict, violence, and that is definitely not what the warrior spirit is. So how would you define and describe the warrior spirit to the audience?
I define the warrior spirit, and I differentiate it from the warrior profession. When you mentioned, things like conflict, aggression, warfare, guns, ammunition, artillery, these are all things that are part and parcel of the warrior profession. But the question is, what is the warrior spirit? And so how I define the warrior spirit is the spirit that enables you to confidently, courageously, and honorably confront the opportunities and challenges that you face in life. And so while not everybody is geared to be a soldier, not everybody is made to storm a beach or fly a fighter jet or brave artillery fire, every single person in their family, in their community, and in their nation has it in them to be a warrior within their sphere of influence. And so that's what I'm trying to encourage people to be. It's interesting you say that, people often associate the warrior spirit with kind of conflict or physical aggression. But I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this, being trained in martial arts, one of the first things that you learn in martial arts is not how to fight, it's how not to fight, right? If you're in a dojo, or if you're talking to somebody who is well schooled in traditional martial arts, they are going to focus primarily on teaching you how to not fight, how to avoid conflict, not run away from it, but how to model yourself and your own behavior, how to confront people in such a way that it doesn't escalate to the level of physical violence. If you're able to carry yourself with confidence, with courage, and that will show on your face, that will show on your countenance, right? So that people will look at you and they'll say, you know what, that those 1 to 3% of the population, the predators that we speak of, the psychopaths who are looking to prey on people, they're going to look at you and say, no, not that one. Not that one. That looks like a hard target, as we would say in the military. These people, the psychopaths of the world, we all think that people think like us. That's what we think, but they don't think like us. So they're not looking for a fair fight. They're looking for somebody who's weak, who they can take advantage of. So if you model yourself as somebody who's not easy to take advantage of, then you are actually promoting greater peace by being a person that is trained in how to conduct yourself and how to engage in physical violence if you have to. That's actually going to promote greater peace.
Absolutely. And even I think that, for our own families, our own communities, if you are a warrior and you have that warrior spirit and you carry yourself with that confidence, that courage, that kind of seeps out and impacts the other people around you, and they want a little bit of that too. And then, that I think creates this incredible, wonderful cycle of positive energy, and it can make the world a better place. And I really do want to see that happen someday.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I remember talking to my grandmother, and she was very English. Her mother had come over from London, so it was very English. She enjoyed her English tea. She enjoyed her English mannerisms. And I remember talking with her, and I think it was maybe it was that generation. It was also maybe a cultural thing, but never complained at all about what was going on in their personal lives. And I remember something specific. I think she was sick at the time, and I'm like, "Grandma, what's going on?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm sick. I'm battling something." And then she followed up. She's like, "Oh, it's so boring. Don't want to talk about that." I'm like, "Grandma, that's not boring, I mean, and it was just like that. She didn't want to put her problems on me, Now, listen, there's an element of that that's not always healthy, right? Because sometimes you need to ask for help.
Right.
But there's also an element of that is healthy. And we've kind of lost sight of that. But stop complaining. Come on, there's a proper element of realizing everybody's got problems, and you don't need to go onto social media and broadcast yours, because you don't want to bring people down constantly. We've all been around people who are like that. You just around them and you say, well, it's a beautiful day outside. And they say something like, I know, it's just terrible. Did you hear what happened on the news? And you're just like, God, I can't be around you. I'm sorry, but you suck all the energy out of the room, as opposed to somebody who's able to bear up their burdens and say, doesn't matter how bad things are. I start life with an element of gratitude for what I do have, and I'm able to be courageous, and I'm able to be strong. And I know that no matter what life throws at me, I'm able to handle it, and I'm able to turn around and not place it on everybody else around me. But you know what? I can actually carry my own baggage on my own. There is an element of virtue in that, and bravery, and we've kind of lost that as we've gone on.
Absolutely. I just had to laugh because I actually had to break up with a friend of mine. She was my very best and dearest friend in all the world for 30 years. And she got to be so dark, so negative, such an energy suck, as you said. She would walk into a room and it was almost like a walking thundercloud. It was horrible. And I finally had to break up with her after 30 years because I just couldn't stand it anymore. And when I did that, a whole new world opened up for me. And coincidentally, this kind of was at the same time I was doing my martial arts training, just getting started. And as I was getting stronger in the spirit of a martial artist, that's when I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And that is so empowering.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that absolutely everybody has the right to free speech, to say what they want, to broadcast whatever they want out into the world. But I also have the right to say that I don't want to dwell on that every single day, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a simple matter of mental and spiritual hygiene that, and this is what my wife and I, we've been talking about just the other day. We've been going through and deleting so many accounts off of our Instagram that we follow. Because you just look at stuff and it's like, you don't want to be ignorant of what's going on in the world, but also you need to focus your time and energy on things that you can actually affect, that you can actually focus on, the actually have a chance to influence based on your own actions every single day. And you can't constantly put negativity into your mind and think that you're going to come out and be the best version of yourself for your family, for your friends, for the community around you. So absolutely, I think that rigorously protecting your own mindset is something that you need to engage in every single day, and you need to ask yourself, is this relationship really a two-way relationship, or am I pouring into them, or what exactly are they pouring into me? And it sounds selfish, but it's really not, because what you do, if you say, listen, I really can't be around you, that might be the best thing that person could hear, because otherwise you're enabling them and maintaining that status quo of where they're at, and you don't want to be the enabler either.
Right. Self-introspection is a very powerful tool to have.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't have it.
Until they run into something that knocks them for a loop. Unfortunately, that's happened to me in my own life. I'm not just like pointing the finger at other people, but it's like you're going along, you think things are great, until you run into a brick wall, and then you have to look down. You're like, okay, what happened? Clearly, my map was off somewhere. This map I've been using to navigate, clearly it was off. And so I can either blame the brick wall for being there, or I can try to fix the map and try to go around it next time. So, the wise person tends to look to themselves first.
Absolutely. So now, when did you decide to write the book? Like, was it something that was just brewing in the back of your mind, or did you wake up one morning and say, you know what, I have got to share some of these principles that I learned that were so beneficial to my life, and I really want other people to be able to experience it without having to spend how many years in the military?
It's a great question. I started writing it during the COVID lockdowns, during that craziness. Remember, we were all locked in our rooms basically, and trying not to lose our minds. And there was so much going on in the world that was promoting this idea that we should lose our minds. And it was bothering me so much that I remember I couldn't sleep. I was having trouble sleeping because of some of the stuff I was seeing. And I was also teaching online at the time. And I was seeing the effect that certain things were having on the students at the university level, and it really bothered me. So the only way I could find to get myself to sleep was actually to pull out my journal before I would go to bed at night and just write everything down that was on my mind. And it was just ramblings, it was scribbles, it was sometimes a page long, sometimes it was multiple pages, just different ideas that had been circling around in my head. And eventually, my wife, at the time, she was my girlfriend. She picked it up, she read through it, and she's like, "This is actually really, really good. Would you ever think about like putting this into a book? Like could actually help people?" And at the time, I was like, "No, I'm never. I'm not an author. Like, what are you talking about? No." But then it started me thinking, like, okay, maybe. If I was going to write a book, what would it be about? What would the title be? What would, could I write out just the chapter titles? And could that spark anything? And I was very non-committal, but I was taking like those baby steps forward and thinking like, okay, if I was going to do this, how would I do this? And so it was a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but I knew that I wanted to try to help the people that were around me. And I thought the more that I looked into it and the more studying I did, I read a lot of books, I read a lot of articles. The more that I did that, I realized that probably the best way for me to move forward and to take a step forward in influencing people and teaching them what I know would be to write a book. So that's how the book came together.
How long did it take for you to write it? I'm curious.
With all the editing and the writing, so the entire process, 3 years.
Wow. Congratulations. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now, what was your reaction the first time you got a print copy of your book and you opened that package and you saw it there in front of you and you picked it up? What did you feel?
It was surreal. It was exhilaration and also abject terror.
I love that. That is so funny. And that is so honest, because that is definitely a reaction that authors frequently have. It's like, oh my goodness, what have I done?
Yeah. And there's always in your back of mind, how will this be received? How will this be accepted? And then there's always that little voice in the back of your head that says like, this is terrible, and the imposter syndrome tends to raise its head, right? Of course, people have been reading it the entire time and have been telling you like, little snippets here and there. The editors have gone through it. They say that they really like it. They learned it, but it doesn't really, somehow that little voice is still in your head that says this is going to be a complete and utter failure. And, the more that I've heard that voice and the more that I've dealt with it, the more I realize that it's really just full of shit. And that the more that you can ignore it, it doesn't ever go away. I think people in their minds, they think, well, I'll do something like write a book or whatever. Once that little voice is no longer there. And in that case, you're never going to do anything, because voice is always going to be there, whether you're getting up on stage and public speaking. This is what I tell students when I was teaching public speaking, is like, if you're waiting for the point to where you're never nervous, then you're never going to get up and speak. Because I've spoken in front of hundreds of people before. I've spoken in front of very small groups in the military over the top of a Humvee. I've spoken in front of general level officers and 200-300 people in the room. I've spoken in front of classes. I've spoken in front of business leaders, CEOs. It never goes away. All it does is it does tend to get a little bit smaller, and you learn how to ignore it. And you also learn how to use those flutterings in your stomach, the kind of the nervous energy, to accept that and say, okay, this is actually something I can turn into positive energy, so where I show up on a different level when I'm actually speaking to people, or when I'm writing a book, or no matter what I'm doing, it can be that fuel that encourages me and also indicates to me that I'm stepping in a positive direction. There's this book I read. It's called, it's a play on Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And the title of the book is The War of Art.
Oh, I've heard of that book, and I've been meaning to get it.
Steven Pressfield, he characterizes that feeling that you get that holds you back as a figure that he calls resistance. And it's a brilliant insight that he makes, that whenever you're leveling up from a lower sphere up to a higher realm of existence, that you're going to feel resistance. All right. That you're going to feel that resistance, that self-doubt, that self-sabotage. That's when that shows up. But whenever you're taking a step down, somehow it's not there. Right. So, resistance tends to give you a free pass if you're going from being, I don't know, a great artist into being, I don't know, a 2-bit salesman or something. Not that there's anything wrong with salesmen, but you get my point. Like a used car, if you're stepping down to being a used car salesman from being whatever it is you were called to be, somehow you don't feel that resistance. So that means that if you do feel that resistance, you feel that nervousness, that self-sabotage start to seep in, that is something you can lean into because it's a pretty good indication that you're stepping in the proper direction. You're going in the right direction in your life, and you know that no matter what happens, it's going to be in your best interest. You're going to come out a different person. You're going to learn something, and it's unsettling at times. It requires a certain amount of courage. But if, when you do that, you're not living somebody else's life. You're living your life, and there is a grand adventure to that. So,
well, it's getting out of your comfort zone. You have got to get out of your comfort zone, and it's terribly uncomfortable. That's why people do become complacent, and they don't want to try new things. That's what terrifies me, I think, the most, is becoming complacent. But on the other hand, sometimes it's like, well, it would be kind of nice just to do it for a little while and see what it's like. But of course, that, stubbornness inside of me just says, no, just keep on pushing and trying new things. And as somebody who is maturing as a baby boomer, I think that's part of a really good anti-aging component too, is to always be interested in something new and different, and putting yourself out there in a way that gives you, like you said, that resistance. Boy, and that is powerful, that resistance.
I forget who said it. I heard somebody say, we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing. And so I love your perspective of always looking for what's next and how can I improve? How can I learn? How can I reach that next level of awareness or maturity? I love that mindset.
I think, my dad was a World War II vet, and he was actually a Navy. He was a Seabee. He was in the Seabees.
Okay.
And he immigrated to the United States with my grandmother they left on December 29th, 1939, on the last ship out of Calais before they closed the port. He was 12 years old.
Wow.
5 years later, he was in the Navy. He joined the U.S. Navy.
Wow.
And, just his resilience. He had a near fatal injury when he was an infant. It's a very long story, but his resilience and his strength and his courage, he wasn't always an easy person to be around, but is very admirable. And like you said, you never complain. Your grandmother never complained. You just pick yourself back up, by your bootstraps, dust yourself off, and you just keep on going.
Yeah. The greatest generation.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That's another book that I'm working on too, but I'm still trying to get over the one that was released a year ago. I had bad writer's remorse on that one for a while, just for 3 weeks, until I convinced myself that nobody who knew me was going to read the book. Then I was okay. And once I convinced myself, took 3 weeks. The next day I went to the dojo and a copy of my book was sitting on Sensei's desk. And it was like, oh God, back under the covers.
It is a weird feeling when people start to read your book,
You feel vulnerable.
It is. It's a different level of vulnerability. There's been times when I've remarked to my friends and family, and it's not much of an overstatement to say that I would rather be back in Afghanistan fighting on that realm. And you're very vulnerable out there, but you're physically vulnerable, which is it's a different level of vulnerability when you are letting people know your deepest, darkest secrets inside of you and what you think and what you believe, because that's kind of strikes at the core of you. And it hits differently than a physical injury might hit. So I think that's where that feeling of being vulnerable and needing that courage comes from.
Yeah, I did not feel that with my first book, because my first book really wasn't that personal. It wasn't that personal. It had some stories about me, but not like the second book. But I felt like, the way I describe it is, I felt like I was walking like stark naked down Main Street with everybody. And it was a very uncomfortable feeling, but I got over it. Sad, happy to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel like there might be another book in you?
I'm sure there will be. Yes. I'm not working on anything just yet. But I find a great amount of passion and pleasure in writing. So I'm sure that it'll come. But I just have to figure out what the next problem is. So,
Oh, I'm sure the next problem will present itself. There's plenty
oh,
of
I'm
them floating around right now.
I'm sure it will. People ask me, because one of the big topics in the book is about purpose and about engaging your purpose. That's part and parcel of what the warrior spirit is. And so they say, well, how do I find my purpose? Right. And, or what is my purpose? And I say, well, I can't tell you what your purpose is, but I can tell you that there's two surefire ways that I know to start exploring it and just kind of help you figure it out. And they kind of exist at polar opposites of each other. One of them's positive, one of them's negative. The positive is figure out what brings life into you, what you enjoy, what interests you. What are you doing when an hour goes by and it feels like 5 minutes, right? What do you walk away from after engaging in, and you feel like a better version of yourself? You feel stronger, you feel fuller, you feel excited. That's one of the reasons I do podcasts, is just I love having great conversations, right? That's part of what it is for me. An hour will go by and I'll be like, wow, that felt like 10 minutes. It's just amazing. So that's one way to do it, and figure that out and start doing more of that. The other one I said comes from the negative spot, and that's figure out what pisses you off, what really bothers you. And it might bother you for a reason. That reason might be your problem that you need to solve. It might be something that you were put on this earth to deal with. And it might be, the mythological dragon that you need to slay. And that's your particular problem that you need to solve. So, and that's actually one of the ways that my book came about, is there was sayings in the world that were really bothering me. And I figured, okay, I could either run away from them, I could complain about them, or I could try to be part of the solution. So, I chose the latter. And people are afraid to do that, because when you go out to fight the dragon could be big. It could be a very real dragon, and you could get burnt, you could get eaten. But my response is that the bigger the dragon is, first of all, the more worthy the cause it is. And also, big dragons tend to hoard a lot more gold. So that's like the positive aspect of going and facing the dragon. And also, if it's a big dragon, it takes you your whole life to fight it, well, then that sounds like a life purpose to me. And that doesn't sound like a bad thing. So figure out what pisses you off and go towards that, run towards that, and figure out how you can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem that's just complaining about it. One of the first things I talk about in the book in the introduction is the story of St. George and the dragon. I love that story.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, with St. George and the dragon.
Well, and it's really interesting. The more I looked into it, you think it's just a simple child's tale, right? As we tell it, it's like a fairy tale we tell the children. The more I looked into it, the more I realized just how deep the story was. I mean, this is a dragon. He's preying on a city, and St. George is the knight that comes to slay the dragon. But what's interesting in that is that you read into it a little bit more, and this city has been sacrificing sheep to the dragon on a daily basis in order to keep the dragon appeased. What does that mean? Well, let's see. Sheep are a source of food. They're also a source of, or a symbol of prosperity, especially back then. The more cattle you had, the wealthier you were. So what is it? So if you avoid fighting the dragons in your life, you sit in your parents' basement and you brood about how unfair the world is. What are you doing? Well, you're sacrificing your future prosperity to the dragon day after day, little by little, until eventually the city runs out of sheep and there's no prosperity left. Then the dragon starts to demand, weirdly enough, maidens. So the women of the city start being sacrificed to this dragon. What does that mean? Well, again, if you're resentful and bitter or cowardly, and you're sitting in your parents' basement and you're avoiding the dragons you need to face in your life, first you sacrifice your prosperity, then you sacrifice all of your marital prospects, right? Because all the maidens are being sacrificed to the dragon. Because again, why would any maidens want to be with a guy who's cowering in his bedroom and unwilling to go out and face the dragon, who's not willing to engage the warrior spirit? It's a good question. Until eventually the dragon comes for, and the very final maiden is the king's daughter, the princess herself. And the symbol of the future and the hope of the city is about to be sacrificed to the dragon. And that's when St. George comes in. And that's when he stumbles upon the scene and realizes this isn't good. This isn't the right way to deal with this. I'm going to go out, I'm going to face down the dragon, which he eventually slays. after a brutal fight. And as such, he receives the princess's hand in marriage, and he becomes the king and ruler of the city, meaning whoever we should elevate to be the ruler of the city, the person who should get the gold, who should be the progenitor of future generations, is the person who seeks out the dragon and slays it for the good of the community. So
not the one that hides in the basement and waits for somebody else to do it and just keeps throwing the
right.
maidens and the sheep and everything out
Absolutely.
and
Yeah,
posting on social media.
that's right. About how unfair the world is. So
Exactly.
yes. So I really liked that story. And the more that I studied it, the more it unfolded to me. And I realized that the big piece that was missing, I think, in our current culture that is part of that story is the warrior spirit. And so what does the warrior spirit mean? So what I explore in the book is I try to describe what the warrior spirit is by discussing the 4 primary warrior virtues that I see that have become increasingly, let's say, problematic in our modern culture. And that is the idea of service. People associate service with inferiority. And there's really nothing is more mistaken than that notion, that just because you're serving others does not mean you're inferior to them. So the warrior notion of service to others is the key. And it balances this idea of responsibility for yourself and responsibility for others, this kind of social responsibility that we have. That's the warrior idea of service. I talk about the idea of truth. What does it mean? What does truth mean? What does it mean to live an honest, noble life? I deal with the virtue of strength and its associated virtue, power. And then lastly, I deal with the virtue of fortitude in conflict. What does it mean to have fortitude and to avoid the trap of the victimhood mindset? And you put all that together, I think you have the warrior spirit.
Awesome. You're going to love this. But I actually have a framed picture of St. George in my spare bedroom.
Right? Really?
Yes. Yes. I was raised Byzantine Catholic, so Eastern European, obviously. And the church that I grew up in was St. George's.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I knew I would like talking to you. I knew we would have a lot in common.
And on that note, when you were talking about the virtues too, which, a lot of those virtues are the same, what we call the characteristics or the trait of the ninja, the martial art that I study. And especially when it comes to strength and power. So, of course, when people look at me and they find out that I am a martial artist, I get a variety of different reactions. And when you look at me, you wouldn't think, oh, strength and power, because, I'm 5'7", I'm 125 pounds. But there's a difference between strength and power, the way we think of it, with big muscles and, big men, or maybe MMA, than that subtle artistic type of strength and power that anybody and everybody already has.
Yes. Yeah, and this is something that as I was going through the book, I was looking at the precepts of like Japanese Bushido, or looking at the the code of chivalry that the European knights would follow, or the virtues and the values of the United States Marine Corps, which is obviously near and dear to my heart, honor, courage, and commitment. And looking at the leadership traits and the leadership principles, you figure out very quickly that the warrior traditions focused far more on the strength of character than they did strength of physical body. Physical body is important, yes. And it's oftentimes for people who are looking for a starting point, how do I start to develop this warrior spirit in my life? Sometimes a good starting point is to start with physical fitness, not because that's the end all be all, but first of all, it's connected to everything else. And secondly, when you're pushed to your physical extremes, other weaknesses tend to rear their ugly heads. And this is why you get pushed to your limits when you're in military training. It's not just because, yes, the military occupation is a very physical one, so obviously you need to be physically fit. But the other reason why they run you ragged and run you through the hills and they bring you to the edge of your physical limitations is because then the other character limitations tend to rear their head, and you figure them out. and once you figure them out, then you can start to develop them. You can start to work on them. And so if people often ask, like, where do I start? I'm like, start with what you can control. You can't always control your emotions. You can't always control your mindset as easily as you can control your body. So get out, do something physical, and make that a regular routine in your weekly life, and watch as things start to get better.
You just have to move, and it doesn't have to be something huge if you're in a depressed state, or just getting out and going for a walk. Just get out of bed, start moving. It doesn't have to be going to the gym 3 times a week, but just start moving. Once you start moving, you'll feel so much better that you'll keep moving.
Get out and do something that makes you sweat, even if it's just walking. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Or something that makes you smile, that too.
Yes.
So now, do you have all of this in the book, all of these, like, tips, techniques, and things that people can follow?
Yes, I do. The very last chapter of the book is called Pray for Peace, Prepare for War. And in there, I tried to bring everything that I talked about in the previous chapters of the book, which are often very philosophical, and put some practical steps in place. How do I start to develop some of these ideas in my daily life? Things like getting out and doing something physical every single day. Things like find something difficult, something that challenges you, something that's hard, and go and do it. It could be anything. It could be writing a book. It could be writing a screenplay. It could be recording a song. It could be going and hiking a mountain. It could be doing something, joining a CrossFit gym, joining a dojo. It doesn't matter. Do something difficult that's going to challenge you. Wake up every day and journal before you do anything else. Start your day by writing down. The first thing you write down is what you're grateful for. People think gratitude is an emotion. It's something that just spontaneously happens. Gratitude is a practice. It's something that you develop. It's not just something that happens to you. It's a mindset that you choose to engage. So these are just a couple of the steps I go through in that final chapter. People have asked me, why do I need to read the previous chapter? Like, why do I need to have like a proper like philosophical understanding? Why can't I just jump to the end and start to like put some of these things in place? I was reading a book on finance the other day, personal finance. And when you pick up a book on finance, you think, oh, there's going to be tips and tricks about interest rates, about investments, about this, about that, right? I swear, the first half of the book is all about philosophy. And the guy, the author, Garrett Gunderson is the author. He says, listen, I'm sorry, I know this has been a bit philosophical, but if you don't change the way you think about money, you'll never change your actual wealth, your personal wealth, because you need to change your mindset before you change anything else. If you change anything else, first of all, it's not going to last. Secondly, you're probably not going to do it right, because your mindset needs to shift. So if you want to engage the warrior spirit, yes, it's great to have these tips and tricks and practices in place, but you also need to change the way you think about going and engaging in the opportunities and challenges of your life, particularly in the modern Western culture, when a lot of the ways we think about things are a little bit skewed, when we seem to have lost that warrior spirit. We need to re-engage, kind of reset the mindset before we go into like the tips and practical tips.
Now, do you coach people?
I have talked with the buddy of mine. I'm talking with him right now about developing a leadership course and kind of a coaching course. It's not live yet, but that is something that we're developing maybe next year.
Well, when you do, contact me, come on back on the show, and we can talk again, and then you can promote it.
Okay.
Because excellent. I know there's a lot of listeners right now who are thinking they really want some of that warrior spirit.
Yeah, well, I mean, teaching is something that is near and dear to my heart, being in the university. I have a very good friend who's working with me on this, and he loves coaching. We were actually having a discussion just 2 days ago and asked, what's the difference between teaching and coaching? Is they're very closely linked. I think that teaching, you tend to give knowledge out. It's kind of an outward process where you're educating others. whereas coaching tends to create an open space and allow people and draw things out of people. And I think that there's a dynamic to where if you're doing things properly, you have both a teaching and a coaching going on at the same time, to where you're imparting a little bit of what you know, but you're also drawing things out of other people, to where there's really this dynamic conversation that goes on, kind of like a podcast where, this isn't me getting on and like reading something scripted. We wouldn't need each other here if we were going to do that. You could just, you could read a book, right? That's scripted. But the brilliance of having a conversation going is that both people are enlightened, both people are engaged, and you tend to draw things out of people while also sharing your personal experiences. So that's one of the best ways to go about learning, in my personal opinion. I think that's why people like listening to podcasts.
Wow, absolutely. So now how can, pardon me, how can people get a hold of you, and how can they contact you, and where can they find your book?
They can find my book primarily on Amazon right now.
Okay.
And so just, get on Amazon, Reawakening the Warrior Spirit. It'll be one of the first ones that come up. It'll be the first one that comes up. And I have a website, thewarriorjournal.com, where I have several blog posts. I also have a link to the book in there. And then on Instagram, my handle is at Jayson M. Downing. Jayson is spelled with a Y, Jayson M. Downing.
So before we wrap up, do you have any like final pearl of wisdom? I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation. A lot you gave so much information, so many things for the audience to think about. I love that. But the one final like little pearl of wisdom that you think is the most important thing that they can take away?
If I had one thing that I could tell people nowadays is that, in our modern culture, we're presented with a lot of counterproductive and unwinnable games that we're told we need to play every single day. And people telling you to constantly go over your past, to scour yourself for any wrongs you've ever done in your past, to try to continually make apologies for everything that happened in the past. And it just seems so retributive, seems regressive, seems counterproductive. My encouragement to people is just say no thank you. Stop playing those unwinnable games. We have things to do. I'm just done. I'm done with all of it. I have things to do. I have positive things. I have I'm a new father. I have a business to run. I have my wife, and I have friends. I have my family. I have books to write. I have things to do, positive things to do in this world. And I can't get bogged down with all of the regressive, unwinnable games of constantly being angry at everybody and constantly apologizing for everything in the past. So I just encourage people, go find something that you're passionate about, go find something that's difficult, or go find something that pisses you off and fix it, and engage in something hard and meaningful in your life. And just when people encourage you to play those regressive, unwinnable games, just simply look at them and say, no, thank you. I'm not about that right now. If you had asked me at the turn of the century, what will we be engaged with, in the 2020s, I might have said, gosh, we're going to be traveling to distant planets. We're going to be, curing cancer. We're going to be, cheap energy. And we're not. We're just engaged in so many other things, which are just so backwards. And I encourage people to pull their heads up and to stop focusing on those things that bring them down, and to start focusing on things that can make their lives and the lives of those around them a little bit better.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jayson, so much. That was wonderful. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. It was a great experience.
Thank you. And once again, I have to say it one more time. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you for listening. I really appreciate that. And do share this episode with everybody you know. I mean, the warrior spirit is within we all have it. And if we can just access it and release it, this world is going to be a better place. And remember to find one thing, at least one thing that really pisses you off, and try and fix it. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.